There is a black paste that costs less than $2 to make. Yet under the right conditions it can protect steel longer than many expensive anti-rust treatments sold in stores. That sounds impossible, because modern corrosion repair is built on a different promise: keep metal failing slowly enough that you keep paying to stop it. But then something strange happened. Long before modern coatings, black mineral pastes, oil-based sealants, and carbon-rich protective layers were already being used to shield tools, weapons hinges, and exposed iron from moisture and oxygen. The knowledge existed. Then it disappeared. Or more accurately, it was pushed to the margins while patented coatings, industrial primers, and recurring maintenance systems took center stage. A solution this cheap cannot generate profit. And once you understand the chemistry behind this black paste, you will understand why the rust repair industry never had much incentive to bring it back. Rust is not just an ugly orange stain. It is one of the most profitable slow disasters in the modern world. Cars rot from underneath. Gates weaken at the joints. Farm tools die in storage. Pipes fail from the inside out. Industrial frames, marine hardware, rooftops, bridges, and machinery all share the same enemy: oxygen, water, and time. And the official answer is almost always the same: buy a primer, buy a converter, buy a coating, sand it again, reapply next season, replace the damaged section, hire a specialist, start over. The system is not designed around permanence, it is designed around maintenance. That is what makes the black paste so strange. Because the idea behind it is brutally simple: instead of fighting rust only after it appears, create a dense barrier that starves metal of the two things. Corrosion needs most moisture and air, while also using carbon-rich and alkaline materials that make the surface less chemically favorable for oxidation. No futuristic nanotechnology, no luxury marine formula, no industrial secret worth hundreds of dollars per gallon. Just a dark, sticky, mineral-heavy protective layer based on principles people understood long before modern rust brands existed. So why do most people never hear about it? Because cheap protection creates a problem for expensive industries. If a low-cost paste made from common materials can dramatically slow corrosion on tools, hinges, fences, and exposed steel, then the real value of many commercial rust solutions begins to look less like innovation and more like packaging. And that is where the mystery begins. Not with whether the paste works, but with how an idea so simple, so affordable, and so practical was allowed to fade from mainstream use, while the market filled with products that promise protection but quietly depend on metal never being fully saved. To understand the black paste, you have to go back to a time before rust was a retail category. For most of history, people could not afford to let iron fail. A broken blade, corroded hinge, damaged plow, or weakened fastener was not a minor inconvenience. It could mean crop loss, security failure, transport problems, or the collapse of expensive handmade equipment. Metal was valuable, labor was slow, and replacement was never easy. So preservation mattered. That is why many old protection methods were built on a principle modern consumers rarely think about. Do not just paint metal, bury it under chemistry. Across different regions, black protective mixtures appeared again and again in slightly different forms. Some were based on lamp black or soot mixed with oil. Some used tar pitch wax or animal fat. Others combined charcoal dust, lime derivatives, mineral powders, plant oils, or resins to create a coating that was dark, dense, sticky, and stubbornly resistant to weather. These were not elegant formulas designed for marketing. They were practical survival technologies. Black was not chosen for aesthetics. It was often the natural result of carbon-rich ingredients, charcoal, soot, burned organic matter, bituminous materials, or heat-treated oils. Those ingredients helped create a thick, moisture-resistant barrier. In many cases, they also improved adhesion-filled surface irregularities and formed a sacrificial outer skin that took environmental abuse before the metal underneath did. Blacksmiths, armorers, wheelwrights, builders, and shipworkers all understood a version of the same lesson: metal survives longer when isolated from wet air and sealed under materials that do not surrender easily. Look at old tools that spent decades in barns. Look at historical gate hardware, forged nails, brackets, locks, and agricultural parts that somehow outlived modern equivalents despite receiving less scientific treatment. The reason was not magic. It was often a combination of thicker metal, slower exposure, and very old protective habits that favored saturation coating, oiling, carbonizing, and sealing. In some traditions, iron was heated and quenched in oils or organic mixtures, darkening the surface and improving resistance. In others, parts were coated in tar-like compounds before storage or installation. Woodworkers treated iron hardware with greasy black compounds to keep rain from entering joints. Maritime communities relied on pitch and carbon-heavy sealants because salt air punished any bare metal with brutal speed. These methods varied, but the philosophy remained constant. Protection came first, appearance came second. Cost had to stay low, materials had to be accessible, and the coating had to be renewable by hand. That last point matters. Modern rust protection often feels specialized. It comes in branded containers with technical labels, safety claims, proprietary binders, and carefully defined application windows. Older systems were different. They were meant to be made repaired and reapplied locally. A farmer did not need a corrosion consultant. A craftsperson did not need a catalogue of patented products. Protection belonged to ordinary skill. So where did the black paste specifically come from? Not from one single civilization or one lost recipe, but from a whole family of low-cost preservation methods built around carbon oil, alkalinity, and water resistance. In some places, people used charcoal dust with linseed oil. In others, soot was blended into animal grease or resin. Protective blacking compounds for ironwork became common because they were easy to produce from the leftovers of fire fuel and workshop life. What industry later sold as protective coating systems often began as common knowledge. Then industrialization changed the relationship between people and materials. Mass production created more metal than local traditions could manage by hand. Standardization favored factory coatings over workshop mixtures. Chemical companies developed new paints, primers, and anti-corrosion products that could be packaged, branded, and sold at scale. Maintenance slowly moved out of folk practice and into commercial dependency. At the same time, old methods began to look primitive. If a formula had no patent, no laboratory story, and no premium price, it was easy to dismiss as outdated. Even when its underlying principles were sound, it no longer fit the industrial narrative of progress. Cheap black paste became old-fashioned. Store-bought coatings became advanced. The market rewarded complexity, not simplicity, and that is how useful knowledge often disappears. Not because it failed, but because it stopped being profitable, fashionable, or institutional. The black paste survived only in fragments in restoration work farm habits, ship maintenance traditions, blacksmith practice, and scattered repair cultures where people still trusted thick, messy, carbon-rich barriers more than glossy promises. What vanished was not the chemistry. What vanished was cultural confidence in ordinary people making durable protection for themselves. And once that confidence was gone, the market had room to replace an inexpensive preventive habit with an endless cycle of rust treatment, repainting, and replacement. The black paste sounds mysterious only until you break it into functions. At its core, rust protection is not magic. It is a war against a simple reaction. Rust forms when iron reacts with oxygen in the presence of moisture. Add salts, acids, polluted air, or repeated wet-dry cycles, and the process accelerates. Once corrosion begins, the metal surface becomes uneven, porous, and chemically active. That roughness traps more water. More water feeds more oxidation. The process starts to sustain itself, so any low-cost protective paste only needs to do 4 things well. Block water, reduce oxygen contact, stabilize the surface, stay attached long enough to matter. That is exactly why old black pastes often worked better than people now assume. The first advantage is barrier density. A paste made from oil carbon-rich powder and fine mineral particles creates a packed layer over the metal. Unlike thin liquid coatings that depend on perfect surface preparation, a thick paste can settle into pits, scratches, hammer marks, and microscopic irregularities. It does not merely sit on top of the surface. It fills weak points where moisture likes to hide. This matters because rust rarely starts on the clean, flat parts. It starts where water lingers: edges, joints, pores, texture, crevices, old damage. A dense black paste physically occupies those spaces and makes it harder for water and oxygen to reach active iron underneath. The second advantage is hydrophobic behavior. Many traditional binders, linseed oil tar-like compounds, waxes, fats, or resinous ingredients naturally resist water. They do not allow moisture to spread across the surface easily. Instead of letting water cling directly to iron, they create a separating film. Even when the surface becomes dirty, that oily or waxy behavior slows wetting and reduces the amount of time metal stays chemically exposed. That alone can dramatically slow corrosion. Because rust is not only about getting wet, it is about staying wet long enough for electrochemical exchange to continue. The third advantage comes from carbon. Soot, charcoal dust, lamp black, and similar black materials are not just colorants. They can improve the body of the paste, help fill voids, reduce permeability, and reinforce the physical structure of the coating. Fine carbon particles also distribute through the binder and make the layer thicker and more opaque. In practical terms, carbon helps transform a simple oil mixture into something closer to a packed shield. Carbon-rich coatings also tend to age in a useful way. Instead of instantly cracking like some brittle films, they can remain slightly flexible, especially when mixed with oils or resins. That flexibility matters on metal exposed to temperature changes, vibration, or expansion and contraction. A coating that moves slightly with the surface survives longer than one that fractures and opens invisible entry points for moisture. The fourth advantage is alkalinity when mineral ingredients are included. Some traditional protective mixtures used lime-derived or ash-derived materials. These alkaline substances matter because corrosion behaves differently depending on local surface chemistry. A more alkaline environment can make iron less favorable to aggressive oxidation than an acidic one. This does not mean the paste cancels rust like a miracle cure. It means the surface conditions become less hospitable to the reaction. That is an important distinction. The paste does not defeat chemistry. It uses chemistry to make corrosion slower, weaker, and less sustainable. The fifth advantage is sacrificial weathering. People often imagine a good coating should remain visually unchanged forever. But many old protective layers were designed to take damage at the outer surface while preserving what mattered below. Sunlight, dust, abrasion, and rain slowly degraded the paste itself first. That outer loss was acceptable because the coating could be renewed cheaply. The metal lasted because the paste suffered in its place. This is one reason cheap black coatings were historically practical. They did not need to be perfect. They only needed to be easier to renew than rust was to repair. And there is another scientific reason these pastes sometimes outperformed expectation. Thickness beats elegance. Modern marketing often praises thin, high-tech, precision-formulated protection. But from a simple diffusion standpoint, a thicker physical barrier can be extremely effective, especially in non-critical environments like tools, gates, brackets, hinges, exterior hardware, and storage metal. Oxygen and water do not care about branding. They care about access. The harder access becomes, the slower rust grows. Of course, the black paste is not universally superior. It is not ideal for every industrial environment. It may not match specialized coatings under extreme heat chemical immersion or high-performance marine use. It can be messy. It may darken surfaces. It often requires occasional renewal. But that does not weaken the core point. Its effectiveness is completely understandable. A carbon-rich, oil-bound, mineral-supported black paste works because it combines surface-filling water resistance, oxygen blocking, chemical moderation, and sacrificial durability in one cheap system. Once you see that the bigger mystery is no longer how it works. The bigger mystery is why people were taught to forget that such a simple system could work at all. No industry needs to hold a secret meeting to bury a cheap solution. Most suppression is quieter than that. It happens through incentives. The rust repair economy makes money when corrosion is treated as a recurring condition, not a mostly preventable one. That does not mean every manufacturer, technician, or retailer is dishonest. Many products do exactly what they claim. Many specialists solve real problems, but the structure of the market still rewards one outcome above all others' ongoing dependence. Think about how corrosion is usually sold to the public. First, metal is allowed to degrade. Then the damage becomes visible. Then the owner is told to buy a remover, a converter, a primer, a top coat, a sealant, and sometimes a replacement part. Then the same cycle returns later. Each stage creates another transaction. A cheap black paste disrupts that logic because it belongs to a different economic model. It is preventive, low-cost, low-status, and difficult to brand as premium. It does not require a complex product ladder. It does not naturally generate high-margin specialization. It teaches the user that durable protection can come from simple materials and repeated habit rather than constant consumption of proprietary systems. That is bad news for any market built on chemical dependence. There is also a deeper cultural issue. Modern industry has trained people to distrust anything that looks handmade, old, dirty, or too affordable. If a coating comes in a polished container with technical diagrams and a long claims list, it feels legitimate. If a protective paste looks like something a mechanic, blacksmith, or farmer mixed in a shed, it feels primitive, even when the underlying physical principles are solid. That psychological bias is powerful. It allows expensive solutions to appear scientific, while cheap solutions are dismissed as folklore. And once that happens, suppression becomes almost automatic. Retail shelves prioritize packaged products. Instruction manuals recommend approved systems. Contractors follow standardized specifications. Manufacturers avoid endorsing methods they cannot fully control or monetize. Training programs teach branded workflows instead of material intuition. Over time, the public stops asking whether simple barriers work. They only ask which product line to buy. Another reason the black paste stays marginal is that permanence is not always the most profitable form of success. A coating that greatly reduces corrosion for very little money may be excellent for the user, but it is less exciting for a market that benefits from repainting, resurfacing, retreating, and replacing. Long-lasting prevention compresses demand. Recurrent failure expands it. That does not require conspiracy. Only alignment. And alignment is everywhere in modern maintenance culture. You can see it in industries that sell protection, but quietly assume repeat purchase. You can see it in repair systems that normalize seasonal reapplication. You can see it in the way neglected old knowledge is rarely tested against modern claims, unless there is money in rediscovering it. The black paste sits outside that machine. It is too cheap to symbolize expertise, too ordinary to feel innovative, too practical to become luxury, too accessible to support gatekeeping. So it was never necessary to openly ban it. The market only had to do something simpler, ignore it, downgrade it, and replace confidence in common material knowledge with dependence on commercial corrosion management. That is why people today can name brand after brand of rust treatment, yet know almost nothing about the old protective logic those products are often imitating in more expensive form. The silence was not proof the paste failed. The silence was proof that forgotten solutions are easiest to erase when they threaten profitable habits. So what does this mean in real life? It means the black paste is most useful where corrosion begins quietly and spreads because nobody creates a serious barrier early enough. Think about hand tools, garden tools, exterior hinges, iron brackets, fence hardware, exposed bolts, workshop fixtures, storage equipment, barn metal and low to medium risk steel surfaces that face humidity, rain splash, or outdoor air. These are exactly the kinds of places where expensive anti-rust systems are often unnecessary, but bare metal still fails over time. The practical logic is simple. First, remove loose rust-flaking scale dirt and trapped moisture. The surface does not need to look factory new, but it must be dry and reasonably stable. Then apply a thick, dark protective layer that can settle into pits, seams, corners, and surface defects. The goal is not cosmetic perfection. The goal is full coverage and deep isolation from wet air. This is where old methods were smarter than modern appearances. They treated protection as a physical habit. Inspect the metal, recoat worn areas, focus on edges and joints, renew the barrier before failure becomes visible. That approach is cheap, repeatable, and brutally effective for ordinary metal preservation. The black paste is not a miracle, and it is not for every industrial context. But for everyday corrosion prevention, its power comes from accessibility. People can understand it, apply it, and maintain it without entering an expensive cycle of specialized dependency. And that may be the most threatening thing about it. Because once ordinary people realize that long-term metal protection can begin with simple materials, thick coverage, and preventive discipline, rust stops looking like an unavoidable expense and starts looking like a managed problem. The real story was never about a magical black paste. It was about a forgotten principle. Metal lasts longer when ordinary people protect it early, cheaply, and consistently, using dense barriers that block moisture, reduce oxygen contact, and sacrifice themselves before the iron does. That knowledge is old. So old, in fact, that modern industry no longer benefits much from people remembering it. Because once protection becomes simple, recurring repair becomes less necessary. Once durability becomes affordable, premium dependence becomes harder to justify. And once forgotten chemistry becomes visible again, the myth that expensive systems are the only serious answer begins to collapse. The black paste matters not because it is mysterious, but because it exposes something bigger. Some of the most effective solutions are not missing because they failed. They are missing because the world moved toward products that are easier to sell than self-reliance.